Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to All About Ibogaine, a Thursday conversation that is hosted by awake.net. And I'm the interviewer or the person holding the conversation. My name is Lakshmi Narayan, and I'm the co-founder of awake.net. So I started this podcast after Trump's announcement um, fast tracking Ibogaine because I felt like a lot of new people are going to be coming to this, coming to Ibogaine with a lot of questions, and I want, and also there will be a lot of upstarts trying to make a business out of Ibogaine, which is really serious business for anyone wanting to do it. And I wanted to have a venue where people who've been working with this medicine for a long time, Ibogaine pioneers and evangelists, could have a voice and share what they know about it. So we've been talking mostly about the clinical treatment and the Iboga ceremonial aspect of it. Ibogaine is a clinical treatment. Iboga is a ceremonially used by the Bwiti. But this conversation is going to be a deep dive into the socio-political, economic factors that influence how Ibogaine is perceived and how it's used as it enters the global stage as a pharmaceutical. So, or as a plant medicine, which is really the purest form of it. So, with that in mind, I'm really excited to present Jeremy Weate, who hi Jeremy, welcome. So Jeremy is a philosopher, a longtime Ibogaine pioneer. When I first met him in 2017 or so, he was, I think he was co-running Tabula Rasa, right? You were working with Tabula Rasa, and then he is a co-director of GITA, the Global Ibogaine Therapy Alliance, and a philosopher. So we're going to have a conversation about first, I'd love to learn more, Jeremy, about your personal origin story with Ibogaine, and where you are now with it. Just, your story of how you got into this and what you think about it now. And then we'll go into the subject matter of today's second hour, appropriation versus appreciation. So please welcome Jeremy Weate.
Thank you, and good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. So I'm Jeremy. I'm British, as you can tell from my accent, and I first came across Iboga 24 years ago, and I'd basically been living in Nigeria in West Africa, and I was becoming immersed in different African cultures and their histories and lineages. In particular, the Yoruba culture, which is an incredible culture in southwest Nigeria and in a bit of Benin and a little bit of Togo as well. It's a very powerful language, Yoruba. It's almost Shakespearean in its levels of depth and metaphorical intrigue. You can have a full conversation in Yoruba, one person saying one proverb and another person replying with another proverb and all the implied meaning. So it's almost a medieval thought culturescape. And so anyway, I was back in the UK, just doing a few things on a London bus with an old friend of mine, Nick, and we were talking about psychedelics, and he said, have you sort of showing off as young men do about our experiences? And he said, have you heard about Iboga? And I was a bit annoyed because I hadn't heard of it, but it wasn't so much that as it rang a bell. It was almost like the future calling back to my younger self. Iboga, okay. And I quickly, this was the early days of the internet, but I quickly found out that, there was, Gabon is thought of as the Tibet of Africa in terms of a spiritual system and genealogy. And for me, I was coming from the perspective of being annoyed about the negative stereotypes of different African cultures, just the immediate Western reflexive, oh, those poor people that can't help themselves, a basket case charity, whatever. And because I was getting more and more immersed in the power and majesty of a particular West African culture. But then to hear about another African culture, this from a few hundred miles to the east, in West Central Africa. And I should say that I do find it annoying that people confuse West Africa with West Central Africa. I mean, Africa is an absolutely enormous continent. It's 7,000 kilometers. I mean, it's almost twice as wide as America is, east-west. So to get mixed up between West Africa and Central West Africa is like getting New York and California mixed up. It's geographical laziness in the extreme, but enough of that. So to hear about this culture, this tradition, I knew something was going to happen. I had, it's one of those profound moments where something is going to unfold, and lo and behold, it did. And the whole set of stories about what happened next. But it took me to Gabon for a Bwiti initiation at a place called Ibando, which some of you may have heard of on the outskirts of Libreville, and meeting Tatayo and the amazing people that he works with. And I was, when I was in, and we will go into more detail about this, but when I was in Gabon, I was aware that there was so much to know, far more than I could know in a simple trip. And one of the things that I come away from the experience of initiation wasn't actually the non-ordinary state of consciousness that chewing the Iboga got me into, but the Nima, or the shaman who oversaw my ceremony. There was lots of things he said in rat-a-tat-tat French, and my French was only just good enough to follow. But one of the things I understood that he said was, excuse me, he said, you Westerners think you can come here and you can read up on Bwiti and you think you know things. And that is not how it's going to be. That is not how it is. This is not book knowledge. This is knowledge of the body, and it takes a long time. So, to answer your last question now, Lakshmi, I'm very humble in the face of Bwiti and Gabon and spiritual practices, and don't claim to know very much. And I'm really okay about that. I don't want to have a cerebral conceptual relationship to Bwiti. At the right time, when the right time comes up, I'll go back to Gabon and spend more time there and move slowly. But it was
Oh,
such an overwhelming experience being in Gabon that it was enough to last me for quite a few years.
I just want to say something about what you said about I don't want to pretend to know anything or know nothing. And I think this is a spiritual concept or a framework that is good for anyone to have beginner's mind, no matter what philosophy you're approaching, that you don't know anything or you don't know enough, there's more to know, etc. Um, at the same time, I think that human knowledge spans continents, and there are profoundly wise individuals in all around the world and all through time. So just, that's something that each person brings to the mix. So I just wanted to make a comment about that in passing.
Yeah, that's right. We don't know very much. Thinking of Terence McKenna, and we don't even know what the show. We don't know what the show is or whatever that quote he has, but we have very little idea about what's going on. Even our advanced theoretical physics may be missing out on most of reality. Kind of non-material reality post kind of the quantum. In other words, we get to quantum mechanics and we're peering at the edge of full reality, but we're so far away from understanding what's really going on. And so when it comes to Bwiti and Iboga and what it is that you eat the inner bark of a tree and it induces these states, like, does that make any sense? You can come up with explanations for why the shrub does what it does, but if it's warding off predators and insects and whatnot, like, why does it create this state in humans? And it's almost like we might be looking the wrong end down a telescope, like we're seeing these small figures If only we had the apparatus to turn the telescope round, we'd see what's really going on, which we can only speculate, but it could be a whole system that we don't have access to. And even in the state, the Iboga states or Ibogaine states, it's sort of like we're in the Platonic cave. We're staring at shadows on the back of the cave wall, because the full reality of what Iboga is really pointing to is too much for the human brain.
Is it? Is
Maybe,
it?
yeah, yeah. Maybe
Human.
we're too limited to really understand it.
Oh, I suppose, yeah, I suppose so. I suppose even on a metaphysical level, you're inside a body and you have a unique point of view, and it's always going
Exactly,
to be that way. Right, right. That's basically,
exactly.
yeah. So back to your Bwiti story.
Yes. What to say? It's 3 week long initiation. I'd had a couple of Iboga experiences here in the UK before then. Both were Bwiti oriented, and it was actually through those people that I got to go to Abando. Um,
What is Ibando? Can you just explain?
yeah, it's just the name of a compound in the suburb of Libreville, which is the capital of Gabon. And there's a French chap who looks a bit like Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones. He's got this kind of rubbery, wrinkly face. And I think he was, his story is fascinating that in the 70s he was driving a truck and a consignment, I think from France. I might have it wrong, but anyway, he was in Gabon, and I think the lorry broke down and he never left basically. And he himself got immersed in cultures there, and so he's a widely respected person who, with people around him, puts on initiations, among other things. So yeah, very, very grateful to him and the people that work with him. I suppose now it's sort of like a relatively safe option. Other people that go to Gabon might go into the middle of the forest or whatnot, but I didn't really want to risk doing that on my first trip, not knowing much about Gabon. But yeah, I think next time I go, I would like to see more of the country, and yeah, not just think about an initiation and chewing a burger again, but actually, it's part of the Congo rainforest, and there's two great lungs to the planet, right? There's the Amazon and there's the Congo rainforest, and they have some kind of symbiotic relationship with each other. It's not like they're just separate parts of the world. There's dust from the Sahara that crosses over the ocean and pollinates and feeds the Amazon. And so yeah, it's the other great forest apart from the Amazon, the great jungle. And but in a way it's far less explored than the Amazon. It's got far less roads going through it, which is probably a good thing. But yeah, I'd like to get to know the Congo rainforest. And there's another thing, just while I'm thinking about this, is that typical Western reductive way of thinking, right, is that we have now started to obsess about Iboga and Ibogaine, and perhaps rightly so, but there's a whole apothecary of medicines in the Congo rainforest, just like there is in the Amazon. And why the heck are we just focusing on one? It's just reflective of the sick Western mind that we have to atomize and like fetishize one thing over other things and not understand the full. And so if you're in Gabon, there is a kind of perplexed response to, yeah, there's Iboga and it's great, but what about everything else, And in a way, it's good that I tie myself in knots about this, because it's good that the predatory Western farmer brain has not colonized all the plants of the Congo rainforest. Is good in a way, but it's bad in a way that we end up just obsessing about one amazing plant amongst many, many other amazing plants in that forest system.
Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is that business, that saying it's just business. So you
Yeah,
have these psychedelic plant medicines that enter this world of business where all kinds of predatory things are okay in the name of profit and business. And
yeah.
and the two don't come together very gracefully.
Say that again.
Yeah. So, how do the Bwiti, or how do the people in Gabon see this? I know you've only visited once, but from what you've seen or what you've read, how do they see this idea um, uh, of their place and other plants and knowledge and metaphysics? And that's what spirituality is, it's metaphysics. So at the root of it, the reason people go to the Bwiti is because they have a spiritual experience, and the knowledge keepers of the particular branch or tree, that is Iboga, um, how do they see their place in it compared to other medicines? What do they think of ayahuasca? What do they think of other plants? And what do they think of other human beings who bring knowledge, whether you're in the Western world or in the indigenous world? It doesn't really matter. Knowledge comes to different people at different times through different avenues. And if any one tribe, I think I'm jumping into the crux of what it is for me, if you don't mind. If any one tribe claims that they are the knowledge keepers and that nobody else has knowledge, that in itself is a divisive thing that belies the claim, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, first of all, massive caveat that I cannot speak with any authority or expertise about a very highly internally diverse system of beliefs, which is perpetually morphing and changing anyway and not fixed in time. So I can't represent that or speak for that or claim to be a white Western interpreter or anything like that. All I can say is my own perspective and my opinion, right? So as a white Western person, my perception is that there's incredible openness. There isn't any sense of territorialism. So you can look at the debates on reciprocity and Gabon just like you can with Amazonian cultures. And you can think that there is a claim to superior knowledge, but I don't think it's like that. I think maybe another way of thinking about what it is it's a set of disciplines. It takes many years to be a Nima in different Bwiti systems. So it's a tutelage and an apprenticeship, just like it takes many years to be a monk, a Buddhist monk or a Christian monk. So it's a set of disciplinary practices and slow, careful, deliberative, somatic gathering of knowledge of the body,
As opposed to,
as opposed to just reading books all the time and having cognitive, conceptual knowledge.
yeah.
And so from that perspective, it's a discipline, and it's carefully internally regulated. And you can't just set yourself up as a, as an expert. That's why I'm pushing away any sense of expertise or claims of wisdom or superior insight, because I don't have any of that. But yeah, so it's more that it's like a body of knowledge that requires many years of apprenticeship, and that you can't just suddenly, you can't sort of hack that truth. You can't, there's no easy, quick path to the core of it. And I respect the fact that I'm well on the outside of that, and I look forward to slowly biting off a little bit and going back to Gabon and so on. So it's not a claim of superiority, it's a claim of discipline and procedural knowledge gathering, like you see in any religious, serious religious practice of any kind anywhere in the world. And so it's easy to confuse matters, but that's the way I look at it. I recognize and respect the fact that there is a lot of knowledge within Bwiti traditions, and you can't just read yourself up and accelerate yourself into that. You have to be there in the forest or close to the forest. You have to be in that ecosystem, literally, like a literal ecosystem of people, of the music, of the rhythms, of the nature, of the sounds. And it's in that space and that presence of the forest and forest dwelling people and a history of forest dwelling people, because that's the other thing. It's part of what's radically different about somewhere like Gabon is it doesn't have an agricultural tradition. right? These were not, it's not a farming tradition. And so a sense of time that, okay, we seem a long way away from that now in so-called advanced Western societies, but the bedrock of our culture is agriculture. And what the agricultural revolution did to us thousands of years ago, it shapes our sense of time, of when we wake up, of different traditions that we only partially understand these days. But if you're in a forest tradition where the riches of the forest provide a certain form of abundance, you don't have that. You have a completely different somatic-based metaphysics, if you like. And that's what's very different about Gabon. And that's part of what makes me very cautious and hesitant and respectful about Gabon. So I don't know if I'm starting to answer your question or your concern about look, I do think that no one culture has privileged access to the truth, or claims that. Certainly in Gabon, different Bwiti cultures, to my understanding, would not claim that on the one hand. But on the other hand, do you think you can just get there with the same level of knowledge just by going there for a few weeks, or just by taking Iboga and having non-ordinary states of consciousness? No, it's
Well,
much more of a journey than that.
I think you can get there with other medicines, and I have gotten there. I don't think there's there to get to. I think awakening is a evolution of your consciousness, and it doesn't end. But what I have experienced, and this again, I'm speaking from my experience as you are, is that yes, there is an archetypal journey to be had. It has such certain features and crossing points and flavors, and depending on where you come from culturally, what indigenous culture you come from, because we all come from Africa at the beginning. That's where we all come from, scientifically speaking, genetically speaking, but we've we've adapted into different forms. But where we come from, the path is the same, because human consciousness is the same. We all have it in us. We all have this connection to a much bigger intelligence in us. And how we interpret what happens, how we see it, is what religion is in the end, or what culture is these interpretations. So it can be had without Ibogaine or Iboga, is what I'm saying. And that shouldn't be discounted, because while I'm sure what I see in the online conversations is sort of a preoccupation with who gets what, you know, and what's caught in the crossfire of that preoccupation, which is mostly coming from organizations, not individuals.
Mm.
Organizations around, states, governments, organizations. And what gets caught in the crossfire is the actual human need that 100,000 people dying of overdose have, for example. The actual human need and the actual benefit that Ibogaine can bring to the world. And so that's really what I feel is happening. And so I'm glad we're having this conversation to bring forward that there are more profound and deeper voices who don't hold this view.
Yeah, I think, look, can I just respond to Nisha's comment, and then we'll carry on. Looks like she's just looked something up on the internet or used AI, because the story is that the keepers of the knowledge were forest-dwelling, non-agricultural people, the pygmies, for thousands of years. And it's only the Bantu people are a group of people who originated originally from West Africa, not Central West Africa, from West Africa around the Niger Delta, actually Nigeria, where I lived for many years. And there were waves and waves of migration pre-slavery, pre-transatlantic slavery, and then waves and waves of migration during slave raids. And it was in that latter period where there was British and other slave raiding in the Niger Delta that you had Bantu populations going eastwards and then southernwards. But there was many, many waves of migration before that. And so that's why you have Bantu speaking people or Bantu origin people across Southern Africa. Again, I'm not claiming to have superior knowledge, just that's, if you look it up, that's what happened. And so, Nisha, thank you for saying this, but the original keepers of the knowledge were not agriculturalists. And you can't really understand the metaphysical bedrock of Gabon unless you put in that context that most of Gabon has forever been rainforest with very little land for agriculture. And so the belief systems in Gabon are not based on farming cultures. So I hope that makes sense, but that's just how Gabon is and how one should understand Gabon. But now getting back to your point, yes, I mean, there's many different aspects to this, right? So if there's a molecule that has, thanks to the CIA and then thanks to Howard Lotsof, and thanks to many other people, has these remarkable healing powers, no one would want to stand in the way of those gifts and those medicines being spread around the world. And I think part of the problem, Lakshmi, is that we just have white interpreters for this whole damn thing. How many times do we actually get to hear Gabonese people, whether they're from Libreville and, kind of metropolitan Africans, or whether they're people that choose to stay behind in the village or even in the forest? When do we get to hear them speak?
How do we get to hear them? I'm happy to host somebody if they'll come.
Yeah. And it's like you peel that layer of the onion and there's a whole set of other problems that then appear, right? So you say, Lakshmi, the next person I want to have on my podcast is a Gabonese person. And then there's a clamor of voices because Gabon is just like anywhere else. It's
Exactly.
hugely internally complex. It's culturally politicized and politically, it's complicated. It's post-colonial. It's barely post-colonial because France has had its paws all over Gabon. I mean, just to give you a little tidbit on France's relationship to Gabon is oil from Gabon. And this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but honestly, it's not. And do your research. Oil from Gabon funded French politics for decades. It was an absolute extractive colonial capture of Gabon's oil. And so the French chose who was president, and the whole thing was run out of Paris. And it's barely past that. And you want to know why different African countries are very keen to kick the French out? Because they do this cultural colonialism, right? Where the epicenter is Paris and the epicenter of civilization is, unlike, other forms of colonialism where there isn't that kind of cultural veneer so much, like British colonialism. It was just more brutally extractive and nothing to be proud of. In fact, lots of things to be ashamed of. But yeah, so Gabon has been a vassal client state of France and is only now, with the recent change in administration, throwing off the shackles of French. So it's barely a post-colonial state. And there's so if you wanted to have a Gabonese person on your podcast, then there isn't one person that is representative of the internally contradictory whole. But on the other hand, you might want to go for pygmies first of all. If you can have an interpreter, they might speak French. Some of them might not even speak French. But if I was advising you, I would not have a metropolitan Gabonese on because they're just in the city and it's like having someone from Washington talk about ayahuasca. Like
exactly. So
it's
what
going to be filtered.
they'll have a different agenda. So
Exactly.
what do we have to learn as a Western culture from these forest dwellers? Because
you're going to get a different perspective to the one that is annoying you. The one that irks you, you're not going to get that from Gabonese people. They would be wanting to share their gift to the world. They would be wanting to help heal, the pandemic of overdoses, they would be distributive in the gift of nature, not the go away, they don't have that perspective, and I can have a measure of confidence at saying that. But when it comes to reciprocity, thank you, Nisha. When it comes to reciprocity, it's a complex topic that shouldn't be in my mind, boil down to transactionality. But unfortunately, we think of reciprocity in financial terms. And so we don't really understand what equal partnership might be. And just to say a little bit about me and why I'm quite passionate about this is that my day job is as a mining sector consultant. And I go all around the world and basically I advise governments on how to get a win-win situation where they get good fiscal revenues, taxes and royalties from mining projects. The mining projects are as tread as lightly across the surface of the earth as possible, are highly mindful about use of water, and super sensitive to the communities who are going to be living next to a mining project. So I'm really in that space of capitalism, community, responsible investment, and that kind of thing. So I bring that perspective to how I think about Iboga and how I think about reciprocity.
Okay,
I'll
great.
pause there, and I think Nisha's given us a another. Okay, there were forest-dwelling Babongo peoples, but the vast majority have yes, but the Gabonese Bantu have not been there that long. They the last wave, like I said, was sort of 19th century, and that's where in the context of French colonialism, just as a direct parallel of the exploration for rubber in the exploration for natural resources in the Amazon, uncovered ayahuasca practices. The exact parallel in the second lung of the planet happened. So looking for natural resources, going deeper and deeper into the Congo forest.
So
And it
you're
was
saying the exact thing could happen in the Congo that happened in the Amazon in terms of how it goes.
I think she's annoyed with me, Nisha. I'm
Well,
just like
let's just leave
your
that out.
Nisha is doing what I'm resisting, which is claiming knowledge and expertise. But one thing is true is Gabon is not an agriculturally, it doesn't have the sense of time or seasonality that agricultural based societies and agricultural based metaphysics have. That's just the case of it. And to make appeals to Bantus who are not, I mean, okay, we're all indigenous on one level, but some of us came before other people, and the Bantus came the Fang came in from the West 100 plus years ago, 150 years ago, maybe 200 years ago at a stretch, and it's completely related to colonialism further west in West Africa and slave raids and all the rest of it. So Bantu are just as much Gabonese as Pygmies are, for sure, but they're not people that have been in the Congo Basin for thousands and thousands of years. I think, humans, we build up our belief systems over thousands of years. And
Right.
there's so much hidden recesses of why we think the way we think due to things that we're not even aware of, right? And so
For sure.
that's,
Yeah.
the Western mind, the way I think as a Westerner, like we've all gone to see the Odyssey recently, right? These foundational stories, and you might not even remember the story of Odysseus, but nostalgia and nostos and the journey, most of Hollywood is built on stories like the Odyssey, right? But you don't even have to be aware of that. You're just living in that culture. And so I'm saying the same in relationship to Gabon, that the nature of the over engulfing nature of the forest in Gabon and Central African Republic and Congo Brazzaville and DRC, it informs how people think in a way that from an agricultural perspective we just make assumptions about how time is and how human interaction should be that are just not there in cultures that have been forest dwelling for thousands of years.
Yeah, I had a psychedelic experience where I was in a forest and I was this ancient being who lived in a forest. And when I came out of that experience, not with Iboga, it was with another medicine, I felt like that there was this profound sense of connection that I had to the earth and to the things around me,
Yeah.
like my cat does, in that. in that experience. And I really thought it was wonderful to live that way, and I thought, wow, we've lost something here with civilization. We've lost that connection to the
Well,
earth.
it's yeah, just for kicks, a couple of years ago, I trained to be a forest therapist, and I haven't actually been practicing it. Maybe at some point in the future I will, but I did a practicum which involved being at least 6 hours in a forest. So I went to a very old forest near where I live in Bristol. It has a 3,000-year-old mound where people lived, and there's actually a dinosaur that roamed around there like 100 million years ago, but it's like really, really old. And so I sat down in the middle of the forest and meditated, and it was weird. It wasn't as blissful and pleasant. There's just odd stuff going on in forests, like spirits and sprites, and obviously people unfortunately go to kill themselves in forests everywhere in the world. Like, Japan is known for its suicide forests, but
Wow.
many people have killed themselves in that particular forest. And you get to a certain level of consciousness meditating, and you're picking up on stuff which is, ancestral forest spirits versus troubled spirits that are, like barely out of the bodies that they departed, somewhat violently. And so there's a lot going on in forests.
Well, let's
And
get off that by road for now, and let's
yeah,
can you talk about your Bwiti experience? Like, what was it like? Well, what was the did you come away with? I mean, what made you devote so much of your time to Ibogaine?
it's not a rational calling. It's not something I can really. I don't know. It's a calling that's much more grounded than a set of thoughts, and I think that's in accord with my experience at Abando. So first of all, one of the first things you do is you go to get baptized. You go into the middle of a forest, and you get immersed, and you have a lowish dose of the bark just to see how you're responding to it. That alone was a lot, just with a small amount of root bark deep in a forest and then being immersed in the water. That was its own, that would have been enough in a way. But every day it was an ordeal. That's the word. Every day, like one of the days. And I hadn't read up on what was going to happen. So it was all a surprise. Like I didn't want to know. But one of the days, there's a little circle and they light a fire, and then you sit on a stool, and then you get wrapped in canvas, and the canvas encompasses the fire. So there's just smoke, right? And they just wisps, and it's wrapped around your neck like you're at the barber's. And I'm like, okay, this is smoke. You're being smoked, right? All right. How long is this going on for? And it went on, it seemed to go on the whole day. Um, the 2 days, is it 2 days or 3 days after my experience of the full flood dose? It's like, right, we're going dancing now. And I'm still sort of in the grey day, still rememetic, still processing a lot of stuff that's gone on, and being dragged back to the temple. And like, okay, what are we doing here? And we started around midnight, and we danced until about 9 a.m. And it was furious and frenetic and intense. And
The whole
yeah,
village was with you, or how many
no, there was about 20, 30 people, something like that.
how
And that's
many
just to get
initiates?
get you
How
back
many
into your body.
right? How many people going through an initiation of
There
those
was just
20?
me and a Belgian chap. There's two of us. On the night of my ceremony, was it the night of my ceremony or the dance thing? I have to. These are all commingling, but it started raining at 4 a.m. It can't have been the night of my ceremony because that was too heavy duty. It was the night of the dancing. We actually had a break for like 10 minutes at 4 a.m. and it just started raining for 5 minutes, and then it stopped raining. And Tatayo said, it was a good ceremony. It does that when it's been a good ceremony. So yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot to talk about. It's a lot that I don't think about. But I think, again, just to resist the Western urge to reduce this to visions or some message that you
Yeah.
get in a non-ordinary state. No, I don't really reduce it to that. I don't, like certain things came up that, one could talk about, but I think so much of what's going on with the Iboga experience is below the threshold of conscious awareness. It's somehow going through your central nervous system and refreshing everything and targeting the things that need to be targeted. And whether that, is represented phenomenologically in your experience of the trip is kind of irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. Oh, I saw my dead uncle, or I saw that. Well, having said that, this was my experience. And I would also say that because I've been in this Iboga game for a long time, I've um I've heard a lot of other people's experiences. Let me just tell you one experience which I think is archetypically classic and goes to the core of it. So about 15 years ago, I had a lunch meeting with someone, and it was supposed to be about consulting and a consulting opportunity, meeting him and, business. We sat down and I just could not be bothered to talk about business and consulting. Like, I was bored. And so I started talking about my favorite topic, which was Iboga. And so I chewed his ear off about Iboga. Didn't hear him say anything, just droning on. Anyway, we lost touch. And then about 5 years ago, he called me up, Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy. Oh my God. Remember when we had that lunch and we were supposed to have a business meeting and you just told me all about Iboga? He said he'd just been in Costa Rica. I'd seen this place and oh, I remember that conversation. He went in and he said, I have just spent the last 2 days making amends. So what happened was, and this is the archetypal, and this is why I think Iboga and Ibogaine are so relevant for veterans and PTSD and whatnot. His experience, which a lot of people have, is you go to the scene of something bad happening, something traumatic, or something difficult, doesn't have to be traumatic, but a difficult experience, and you have your emotional perspective of that experience and you have the others, and you can hold both sets of interior states equally in both hands and almost triangulate. Oh my God, they did this because this is how they were feeling, and it wasn't my projection of what was going on. Actually, they had a completely different agenda and sense of what was happening, but I perceived it in a negative way, but if only, da da da. So in other words, it's sort of a epiphany of radical compassion. Oh my
Yeah.
God, the other person's perspective explains everything. And I was so wrong to come away from that experience with my own slant on it. So he had that, and he had about five of them. He didn't go into details, but they were profound childhood stuff. And he said he'd just been on the phone for like 2 days, like apologizing. And even now I get emotional because he's a really smart, successful guy. And so I think that is the archetypal experience. And to go back to our earlier conversation, yeah, that's universal. Absolutely. It's not Bwiti, it's not Gabon, it's not Congo Basin, it's a universal
It's
healing
universal.
modality of
You,
the
you can have
medicine.
it in the
Totally.
landmark forum. You can go to the
Yeah,
landmark forum
totally.
and have the same thing
Or a
happen.
Christian or a Jewish or a whatever, Hindu, it's like a universal unlock
Right.
of you've embedded memories and encoded them with emotional value. And all of that is arbitrary and based on your ego. And there's a way of going in there and just lifting it off and saying, actually, that was an arbitrary formulation that you've stored in your body. And you can think about it radically differently. And psychologically at some subliminal level, you're no longer a victim of your experience, you know? And that's just radically liberatingly healing. And people with the most amount of trauma, there is no, this is what keeps me going with Iboga, is that there is, and it's not about comparing with other plant medicines or other spiritual practices. This is just one which has its own. And, like fast forward to, I wanted to see what it was like to work in a business. Like, so in 2016, and you mentioned at the beginning, I worked with my buddy Alvaro to set up an Ibogaine clinic in southern Portugal. I thought I was just going to be kind of the business side of things, but it's like, Jeremy, would you mind sitting for this person and watching the EKG machine? And I'd never come across people as profoundly traumatized as the people that came, with the levels of anger and family issues in my safe childhood and early adulthood. This was levels of hatred and emotion that I hadn't come across. But even if, like, there's two things I want to talk about. One, the miracle of Ibogaine. When you see someone coming out of intense addiction, which is deeply encoded into their central nervous system, and they're free of it within hours, that remains and will always be a miracle.
Totally.
That will always be a miracle to see that. And it's just such a privilege to see that. But then, a few days later, you leave, you're back to reality. And that's when it really begins, and that's where I fear with the American evangelical take on Ibogaine, it's just wildly, madly setting people's expectations in the wrong direction, that they can
Right.
go to Mexico and, this thing will happen to them and everything will be, shining lights and roses. And no, it's like you have that central nervous system cut of getting out of the cycle of, dopamine need. But it's hard. It's really hard to go home and climb out, and it takes a lot of support, a lot of aftercare, a lot of integration. It's very normal to fall off the wagon, whatever the wagon is, and go back again. It's totally normal. And I think where I am in my old age, 20 plus years in with Ibogaine, is just still wanting there to be, and this is where, Anders is my buddy. I've learned so much from Anders, is, the preparation and the aftercare for the hero's journey. I've spent thousands of hours chatting with Anders, who I know and learning a lot from him, and his backstory, his experience. And so I do fear about I hate to say, the American reductive materialistic pill popping model of Ibogaine is not one we should bequeath to the world and scale out.
Well, never fear. I think that's why we exist as a counterculture. That's what Awake is, and that's what we're
Yeah,
creating, is a conversation about plants and having enough people understand the archetypal journey, and that it's really a gift to be initiated by Ibogaine or anything else into your own consciousness, and understand that you have these depths that you can plumb with the help of a alchemical substance. But I think you're right about the evangelical fervor, and that the message is that you're really awakening the healer within yourself, your inner shaman. That's what
yeah,
epigenetics is, looking at
exactly,
yourself and saying, I don't want this and I want this, or I want more of this and less of
exactly,
this. And that's a constant lifelong process that they call integration. And so um,
exactly, exactly. It is hard, because on the one hand, you'd want to be able to lift yourself out of whatever situation you're in. You're in some kind of negative loop about your life, and you can take a psychedelic in a kind of well-held space, but it's just incredibly difficult to do it on your own. And not just the experience, but the afterwards, like and what we're missing, and unfortunately, in a alienated, atomized Western society, we just don't have those layers of depths of community and communitas.
exactly.
um Post the Ibogaine experience, you really don't want to be going back home. You want to be People want to get back home, and they want to, like, show everyone that they're fully functioning and fully sane. And but yeah, it's a lot. The central nervous system has many layers of conditioning to it, and so you can scrub one layer clean, but there's layers underneath it which will snap back if given the opportunity. And I think that's the thing, that whether or not we use the word addiction and addicts, and I'm sensitive to people that find the word addiction like really annoying, but regardless of the term we use, I often find, if I'm honest about it, that people that have come out of dependency of one form or another they might get out of that original modality of dependency, whether it's crack or whatever it is, but it just through the Ibogaine experience tends to morph on and form onto something else. Those patterns are really deep. So you can have a substance dependency free life, but there's a misshaping.
Yeah. There's
You
other
know,
patterns, right? There's other things that
yeah,
you're doing
it's
that
hard to
are,
talk about. It's hard to talk
yes.
about, but I'm not evangelical about that. When you really allow a dependency to get into your system, it's the rare person that fully rinses themselves clean of it and on every level of, down to the mitochondrial.
And how would you even know that? Whether whoever you are, how would you know that something could trigger it?
Yeah.
I mean, I quit smoking for somebody's
He's
got
a
their
doctor
audio
and
on. Please mute.
someone that works with him that wants to see the center in
Oh,
order to send people our way. Specifically, they have one.
Okay, got it.
oh my God,
Yeah.
I'm just seeing who's on the chat. Oh my God, I feel humbled. Gareth, Moxie, Paul Featherstone, Simeon. Here's me just yabbering on, talking
Oh no,
nonsense. And
this is
there's real experts. I've suddenly have imposter syndrome. I know nothing, and that's all I know. Like
uh,
Paul Featherstone has he been on? He is the May guy. He's the
he's
May
coming
guy, but
on soon.
he's at the end of the yellow brick road behind that curtain. There's actually a May guy, and he's the first person I spoke to, and bless him. He actually, all those years ago, he spent hours talking to me, and helping me on my way. And yeah, I honor him. I really do. Give thanks to Paul Featherstone. He is the man. Love the guy. Haven't spent enough time in his physical presence, but yeah, I really love you and respect you, Paul. And you're just one of the hidden figures in our movement who doesn't blow his own trumpet, and just quietly does what he does. So yeah, and he talk about my backstory. He's the one who, have you heard of Dana Beale? He said, and I hadn't heard of Dana Beale. So the second person I spoke to in the Ibogaine scene was Dana Beale, and just a funny story, just to lighten it up. So I go to Manhattan to meet Dana and see his living circumstances above the school in Midtown, and you gotta come with me. You gotta come with me. And like, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm off the plane. I've met Dana for the first time in my life, and we're walking very quickly downtown, about 30 blocks to the LGBT center, and whatever street it is. And where are we going, Dana? What's this about? And it was an ACT UP meeting. And just as we were going in the doorway with the rainbow flag, he was like, "Pretend you're gay. Pretend you're gay." I'm jet lagged, and I'm in an ACT UP meeting with Dana, talking about chemsex and the need for Ibogaine. So bless Dana too, and we cannot have I hope other people bring this up, but that man funded the Ibogaine movement through his hilarious rickety journeys west to east selling crack pot in America, in New York. And he's now nearly 80 years old, and he should not be in prison.
You should
And
not be in
whatever,
prison for 9 years. No, that's totally
I
inhumane.
know,
And well, we're putting together a signature
he's an
campaign.
angel, and he needs all the help we can get, because he might be frustrating and wildly unpredictable, but he is an angel among
Yeah,
us, and he should not be where he is.
yeah. So these days, what do you do with in the world of Ibogaine? Do you do anything with it, or are you pretty much
Yeah, so yeah, with Anders, we are at the early stages of putting together a veterans pathway, which is grounded in a UK European, almost Five Eyes, but Australian New Zealand perspective. So we're at the early stages of conversations with veterans about something that would really make sense to them. So it's led by veterans, inspired by what's happened in America and the advocacy of, veteran advocacy for psychedelics in general, and the veteran advocacy for Ibogaine specifically is brilliant. And no matter how much I was criticizing the evangelical, there's always two sides to something. The fact that we have had such good advocacy, articulate, passionate, is amazing, and it would be foolish to diminish that. But it is a certain model, and it might not be, like drive through Ibogaine, go to Mexico for 48 hours is appalling and is dishonoring to what the
dangerous and dangerous.
Exactly, and dangerous, exactly. So anyway, I'm at the early stages of thinking something through, and very, very careful. I've been smacked around the head by getting too commercially deep in Ibogaine. I've been taught my lesson, and had my face ground into the dirt by getting tempted by, could I make some money out of this? Could this might be my livelihood? No. I just went back to my consulting job, and whatever happens, happens, and whatever doesn't happen, doesn't happen, and I'm good with all of it.
Yeah. Well,
but Gareth Moxie is the OG too, and he, I'm really happy.
He's spoken on here for a couple hours. I want to talk about something that's a little offshoot, if you don't mind, since Gareth is here, which is about Eli Lilly and the 5-MeO $2.8 billion purchase. And when I read up on what they were doing, what the medicine was, it said that they've taken out the rocket ship effect. And well, if you take out the rocket ship effect, what do you have? Because that is so. What do you have any thoughts about that, Gareth? Since you're here,
let the man speak.
I don't know whether he's there. Maybe he's not there. He might have stepped away.
Yeah, I mean,
he'll come back.
Like, we're all contradictory beings, right? I'm in a way glad that Eli Lilly is buying Atai, because I've got stock locked up in Atai, and finally I can release some money. But
well, there you go. There's a conflict.
Yeah, I am not holier than thou at all. I'm in the weeds with everybody else, and that's I'm okay with that.
Well, maybe. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm just not a believer. Again, it's a contradiction, because what have I said? I've said that I don't think the conscious effects of psychedelics are as important as the somatic effects. I definitely said that. But on the other hand, you've just said, look, taking away the rocket ship from 5-MeO DMT debases the medicine. How do you hold those two things in sync with each other? Well, I think when you do Iboga, whether or not you have a visionary experience, everything changes from the ground up if you allow it to change you, right? And it's not just about the visionary side of things. And in the same way, if you have a profound five experience, you're opened up to modes of consciousness that you don't fully understand in a life-changing way, because you're brought close. I've just got to do a childhood thing. Somebody needs to talk while I do a childhood thing.
Okay. So anyone, Simeon, would you like to comment on the Eli Lilly thing and what you think about what's going on? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but are you there? No, he's left. Okay. Oh, he has to jump into a boring business call, he said. All right. Well, that was fast.
Nothing like a bit of multitasking.
So shall we jump into our subject matter for today, which was appropriation versus appreciation, and kind of,
yes.
I would really like to, there's a few things I want to bring up and talk about that's been on my mind for a long time. So I'm just going to pose it to you, and you or anyone else in the audience can answer. One is, so I have watched certain memes being introduced into society by political parties, which shall go unnamed because I don't want to get into that left and right thing. But memes like everyone is equal. No, we're not all born equal. We are not all equal. Universal equality is really not either possible or desirable for us as human beings to thrive. That's one thing. This idea of cultural misappropriation. Well, all culture started in Africa, so we all come from one gene and we're all really this big extended human family. And we have been appropriating or learning from each other culturally for a very long time. You know, the traders on the China route would be learning from each other as they went down that. So it's a false idea, cultural misappropriation. It's a false idea that has divided our society into tribal, this is my tribe and you're taking the feather in my cap. And that's not what's going on. That's not what's really historically going on. And that's not what culture is. Culture. So I feel like that idea is then influencing people to make demands or to shame other people for in the Iboga world, for example, it's shaming people for not uh, paying tribute perhaps to the Bwiti. I think that's the main crux of the issue. And there are people who will be say, has this person, where are they getting the Iboga from? Are they paying the Bwiti? Well, if you're going to start paying anybody tribute, what about the pygmies? Well, what about all these other tribes? I know that pygmies are marginalized in Gabon, if that's what I heard from someone else. So how do you see this problem of it's a false label, I feel, and it's creating conversations that are incorrect. It's not against reciprocity. Reciprocity as a where you appreciate what you've gotten from another culture, and instead of being extractive in your approach to the gifts of the forest, you find a way to, but it has to come from your heart, not from somebody imposing a standard on you and saying that you have to do this no matter where. You have to pay tribute back to Iboga and the Bwiti. That's a piece that I don't find either high consciousness or fair, because plants don't belong to anyone.
I'll say a few things. So thank you for setting that up. Yeah, cultural essentialism is an idea that doesn't make sense because cultures are inherently hybrid and hybridizing, and they're never static in time. So yeah, the idea that there is a pristine culture which has ultimate value that is not influenced from the outside, it doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, Japan cut itself off from the rest of the world for a couple of centuries, right? But that might be an area where you think, oh yeah, there's some kind of cultural monotheism going on. But actually, if you look at Japan, there's a whole complex of issues going on with the Ainu people, the indigenous people, and then its relationship to China. And you think about Zen Buddhism coming from China, from Chan Buddhism. Anyway, so even in the cases where you think you've got kind of a cultural monolith, if you look at it long enough and study it long enough, then you find actually there's a heterogeneity of cultural lineages. There's a plethora of culture, always mixing and fusing, and humans do that, right? We mix and match all the time. So you're right on that. There isn't a cultural archetype that's untainted from the outside. Everything's always mixed up and mongrel, if you like, on the one hand. So I hear you. But there is another hand, Lakshmi. And the other hand is that if you're a colonial or post-colonial subject, there's stuff you're born into that you didn't choose, which is a complicated, traumatic history. One aspect of which is just colonial extractivism, right? And That's painful. And there's pain embedded in generations across, within families and across families. Stories of people, being taken away, and, there's just an awful amount of trauma and pain. And you can't take that, you can't cut that out of the situation. So in the case of Gabon, given that we're talking about Iboga and Ibogaine, you can't peel away or dismiss or pretend that the colonial history didn't exist. Just like you can't pretend Belgium didn't commit horrors to the south in DRC. And so that's, yeah, on the one hand, I agree with you that culture is inherently hybrid. But on the other hand, from a situated perspective, if you're a colonial or post-colonial subject, you're born into a ravaged narrative of
I was
horror.
born in India, which was a colonial,
Exactly.
but
So,
but it
so there's
wasn't
a lot.
a ravaged narrative. It isn't always a ravaged narrative.
No, for sure. No, India is different though, because, not to get sidetracked, but there is such massive cultural, spiritual riches, self-sustaining riches in different Indian traditions, right? Whereas in different African circumstances, they were never given a chance, or they were stamped out very brutally. They were isolated and stamped out. So going back to the West African interest I had in the Yoruba culture, it was viciously attacked through colonialism and reduced. It survived it, and it has its own cultural riches today. But many African circumstances didn't have that massive, like, cultural base, spiritual cultural base to ground itself into. And so the levels of alienation are far more extreme. On the one hand, you have a rich heritage going back many centuries in a place, but on the other hand, it was eviscerated through colonialism in a way that it is not paralleled in the Indian experience, I think.
I think you're right about that, because the tribes were presented as witch doctors and
Yeah, exactly.
that was my impression of African tribes for a long time.
Yeah, I'll give you an example just to make it real. So when I was living in Nigeria, I was drawn to a Yoruba figure, an Orisha as they call them, like a sacred saint type figure called Eshu, sometimes pronounced Esu, E-S-U or E-S-H-U. And it's a classic trickster figure of the crossroads, an intermediary between the realm of the gods and this earthly realm. And if you're in a Yoruba circumstance and you're making a prayer in Yoruba style, you have to first of all pay homage by throwing some whiskey or whatever, pay homage to Eshu, because he's the one who's going to be the conduit for communication. No worries, Gareth. So it's very much like Hermes in the ancient Greek.
Right, exactly.
And there's any number of, in Ghana, they have the spider. And anywhere around the world, you'll have this go-between figure, right? Anyway, what happened when they were going to translate the Bible into Yoruba in the 19th century? Some bugger decided, okay, well, we need, how are we going to translate the devil? Satan. Let's use Eshu. And so you move from a situation where you have the realm of the gods and the intermediary beings and then mortal beings, and there's like a whole pantheon and a harmony of where things fit spiritually, to, oh my God, that's the devil, and the devil's inside our culture and we didn't even know. And thank you, colonial Christian overlords, for it's like a dagger in the heart of the thing that unravels the whole. And to this day, if you're speaking to Yoruba people who are Pentecostal or evangelical, and you start saying, if I did this, I spent a few years living in Nigeria, and I really like Yoruba culture, and particularly I was drawn to Eshu. They will run away because they think you're a devil worshipper.
Right.
Now, is there an example in the Indian, a parallel example where a dagger to the spiritual heart of things was made, which is
Well,
devastating?
Well, so that's Christianity and the polarization of Christianity into good and evil and into an archetypal figure of good and evil, which is all a
Exactly.
dualistic model, which is not
Exactly.
the experience of oneness. So I do think that that figure is the devil. Is that, but the devil has been demonized. You could say that figure as being something very dark. But this idea of a fallen angel, we can all fall. We can all reach angelic heights of consciousness. We can
Yes.
all fall, and that's what that archetype even means: is the worst in you. You
But
know.
let me try and make this point, because I think I fumbled it.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that I agree with you about there is no cultural essence anywhere. Everything is just moving. Apples moved along the Silk Road from China, and rhubarb came from here, and potatoes from there. And if you talk about groceries, the journeys they went across the world, there's no culture that owns a strawberry, right? Like it turns out apples came from Kazakhstan, by the way.
Okay.
But who knew? It's not as if like we have to pay some shekels to the Kazakh people every time we eat an apple. So like
Exactly. So the absurdity of that idea
exactly.
comes out.
I'm with you. It's absurd to try and colonize a plant that has crisscrossed the world.
Right.
That's your point, and I get it. But the point I'm trying to make is that in a colonial, post-colonial situation, you can't peel away the pain and the trauma of the colonial extractive, rapacious, violent encounter. It's all mixed up. And so it's like you have to first of all not know. You have to just go in with like, please tell me, you have to kind of be humble and listen, like, and not impose. And this is where I think I have a issue with you, or your perspective, not you personally, but your perspective is, if you come in with like a story of, look, we're all one, and like, why can't we just get over our cultural hang-ups?
Oh, that's not my
That
story. That's not my.
Okay, but I might be misreading you, but if that
Yeah.
is somebody, not you, but somebody's perspective, look, we need to just like Terence McKenna style transcend cultural specificities, because the truth of oneness, universal awareness, that's where we're all headed and should be headed, and we should be.
Yeah.
I agree,
Wait,
but
it gets away.
we begin by pained bodies and intergenerational trauma, and sitting down with all sensitivity to understand how the cultural aspects of that are part of the whole story of pain across generations. And that's my only rejoinder to what you're saying, is that that's a thing, and that's powerful, and we shouldn't impose our own agendas of oneness onto that situation.
Oh, no, I'm not. I'm saying that medicines like Iboga and Ibogaine and other sacraments, they can catapult you into that state of consciousness. We talked about this at the beginning. And from
Yeah.
there, you're able to look at these generational traumas you might be holding, or someone else, or your culture, and you're able to forgive and forget and move on and transcend. You're able to do that. That's the gift of those medicines. So
Yes.
when you say the people in this whole continent are suffering from trauma, that's true. I think it's up to each human being to find the ethical right thing to do in their particular context of circumstances. So for me, I feel like, hey, people are dying of addiction, and I got behind ending addiction. And this conversation about who gets what before anything is even there to be given commercially is taking away from the primary conversation about how do you get this medicine to a lot of people. And I think that's the other thing I want to bring up. How do you see this happening in this environment we're in, where people who need it, where it can reach them quickly? And to put this in perspective about reaching someone quickly, and what I think about what's going on at a state level right now, I don't think that the response rate is the appropriate response. We know Ibogaine works. We've known for decades. During World War I, I think penicillin was a underfunded mold project, and when they found out that penicillin could help infections, infectious diseases, the US, the allied nations got together with pharmaceutical companies and they fast tracked the production of penicillin, and it reached hundreds of thousands of people. That was immediate, you know. It wasn't about changing the law, it wasn't about setting up research, it wasn't about any of that. It was immediate. And that a similar thing could be done here with Ibogaine. But that's not the conversation we're having, and that's why I'm talking. That's really why I'm inspired to do this.
Yeah, I have no issues with that. I'm with you. It's just it's not so much a question of like should this be universally available. It's more the container and the embedding of the administration of Ibogaine being appropriate and spaced out and client centric on the one hand, and then just issues around access and affordability. There's a couple of things I've read recently in the last few days. Paul Austin, founder of Third Wave, he had a post about Oregon and how psilocybin provision has become very elitist and white. And it's just not the model, and it's going to get even more expensive because the state is jacking up the subscription costs or the licensing costs, sorry. So yeah, that it's just an outlier for state sanctioned psychedelic provision is not going in the right direction. And that's all to do with the American, healthcare system and its extremely, transactional. And so, yeah, it's on the one hand, it's complicated because America is just doing amazing things to open things up, and the kind of calcified nature of governance elsewhere in the world, where it's just so hard to get, radical reform and things like, medicines reform and open-minded attitudes. We can't compete with America, but then on the other hand, the healthcare system is so diabolical.
It is. It's profit oriented. It's
It's
completely profit oriented. Yeah. So that's a problem.
Does it ever work? So like we're coming back to like, well, how can you scale Ibogaine provision then? And how is it going to stop being elitist and vulnerable to, the vagaries of how much you pay for your medical insurance, your health insurance, or the company you work for pays for your. And it's a bleak picture, right? It's a bleak picture for scaling Ibogaine. You're going to have like bargain basement, cheap healthcare plan versions of Ibogaine versus the luxury stuff. And just like provision of drugs and pharma are across the
Nothing is
American
equal.
system.
Right.
It's good for Mexico, though. It's good for Gareth because, like, ultimately you can provide a much better standard of Ibogaine treatment in Mexico than you could ever in America, just because it's much cheaper to do so. So I think I would hope that there's a long history, there's a good future for Mexican Ibogaine provision, even in the era of medicalization in America, just because, you'll be in a better environment, a better vibe. You'll have more time for the pre, the during, and the post. You're out of the toxicities of the culture which fostered your dependency in the first place and all the rest of it. So yeah, I would hope at best that there is just a hybrid future where like if you've got a good medical plan and you can get your Ibogaine treatment for your PTSD, good on you, all the best. But if you don't have so much money or you don't have health insurance at all, then, friends and family, get yourself to Mexico and do the best you can. And so there still will be a medical tourism option. And even it's not to say the UK or other, like we don't have a particularly good healthcare system anymore. And you find yourself, on a gurney in a corridor getting treated in the NHS. It's like we're on our last legs anyway. So what would Ibogaine provision look like in the UK? Probably pretty crap too, to be honest. So I think there is always going to be, and I would hope there's always going to be, more of the kind of mom and pop like not to say Gareth and Blair are mom and pop, but there's something to be said for staying small and not scaling and not being like other Ibogaine factories that we shall not name.
I think the cottage industry model that you're talking about is
Yeah,
really workable. That is workable
exactly.
for all of it, for aftercare, for the
Exactly.
treatment itself. Yeah, definitely. Um, so Gareth, we had asked a question about you. I don't know if you were there, about what you think about Eli Lilly and the 5-MeO 2.8 billion thing, and were you there for it?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know what to think of that, really. I mean, it, it's my molecule, and so I really feel that that molecule should be shared with humanity, but at the same time, just the whole thing, and raising all this money, it just seems like, and then they've got the nasal spray, and it just feels like now you just got to come into the office every 3 months. Do you know what I mean? For your, and what's I can see how they're wanting to use it as an antidepressant, but it's so much more than that, you know.
Right. It's so much
It,
more than that.
yeah, much more than that in many respects. 5-MeO could be classed as like one of the most important experiences a human could have. Not drug experiences, experiences.
Yeah.
So, there seemed to be this great rush to the market with it,
Right, but I
and
think the rush to isolate the molecules and reduce the effect, which is kind of what we started talking about, the molecules and reducing the effect. Well,
yeah.
I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but this pathway is what happened with SSRIs. There used to be plant medicines that were used for depression and other things. There was a whole lineage of all of that. And then the pharmaceuticals isolated the molecules from the Amazonian plants.
Oh,
They've created medicines, and we now
mm,
have a mental health emergency because those medicines are imperfect, imperfectly researched.
right.
They have the billions. The same thing. So if you think of that happening with these psychedelic medicines, and the fact that to begin with they are more powerful than those St. John's wort and
Yeah,
things like that,
yeah,
what can happen to our psychological and psychospiritual health? And so that's really what I think the danger is, and for people to understand that it's going that way. Unless
yeah,
we make a
yeah.
bid for plant medicines in a bigger way, it is going that way. Jeremy, did you have something to say? You, there you are.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's why I think there's going to ultimately what's going to happen is there'll be a pushback against certain models being the predominant ones, and people will, you know, people that go through the factory Ibogaine experience, it often doesn't work for them. And so it's sort of there's going to be a response to that model, and other models will develop which tap into the cottage model that we've been talking about. Um, and so ultimately, it's a bit like mental health care as it is right now, right? That if you get into kind of institutional mental health care, you can be locked in. One flew over the cuckoo's nest is still, you know, like in the UK, they still practice what's it called? Electric shock therapy. Um, what's it called? When you charge the brain with a
Yeah,
forgotten the name for it, but that's still
electric
that's still
therapy.
yeah. Yeah, that's still a first line treatment in the UK, institutional mental health care. And not to dismiss it, I think there is something to electrical stimulation of, but if it's sort of lobotomizing levels of electricity, maybe there's some problem with there. And moving towards, the kind of Nolan Williams approach of, the like applying much more directed currents of electricity, but I'm getting lost away from it. The point is that institutional mental health care is a nightmare in the West. Is a nightmare in Mexico as also. It's a nightmare in many parts of the world. But there is the cottage boutique industry providing, you know, much more holistic levels of mental health care. And that's just a general thing. That's outside of psychedelics, right? There's that whole world. Not to even talk about traditional rehab, right? I mean, traditional rehab in America is terrible. I mean, it's a scam. It's a con, right? I mean, let's call a spade a spade. It's just institutionalized scammery.
So I think this is where the opportunity is. Those of
Yeah,
us
exactly.
in this field is to create these new pathways to redefine the paradigm of healthcare, because psychedelics
Exactly.
don't fit into that paradigm very well. You need a mystery school or a ceremonial, ritualistic element to it for it to make sense.
But and sorry, I forgot the thread I was on, but Paul Austin had an interest, you know, the founder of Third Wave, he had an interesting critique of what's going on in Oregon, and you know, kind of it's become you know, only the elite can afford like state sanctioned psilocybin treatment. But then there was another article, a former psychedelic investor, I maybe won't name him, but he had a piece on LinkedIn about why he's walking away from psychedelics. And it was like about 4 or 5 days ago, and he was just disgusted. He expressed disgust at what's happened to psychedelics. You know, the toxic ego phrenia, you know, just he's horrified by what he's seen and witnessed, and he's just completely walked away from investing in psychedelics. And yeah, just this sense that we're talking more generally now, not about ibogaine, and maybe this is off topic, but
No.
you know, the amplifier effect of psychedelics uh, occurs with ibogaine, but with other psychedelics, and is not inherently good in any way. And in fact, if there are latent unresolved shadows in the cultural collective, then they just get more rapidly surfaced through the psychedelic experience. You know?
Yeah, well, because there's so much competition and people are trying to have more and more spectacular journeys, they do this thing called stacking, and you
Yeah.
know, it's not really good for you to stack too many things, especially when there's not a lot of research about how they go, what the comorbidities are, I guess is the word, of those things being stacked. And as a um, you know, I'm in my 60s. I started doing psychedelics in the 90s. We just did it in our bedroom. We were able to get things in, and so we never stacked anything because there was plenty to do to integrate one journey with one substance.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of reformation that can happen with this model, and educating people more about plant medicines and that journey.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. I don't think we disagree at all on that.
I hope we don't disagree on anything, actually. But in fact, I think we started to speak on this subject because there is a fundamental agreement about this idea that culture, that cultural appropriation is not a real thing. And so for people who get divided on that subject, you should understand that it's not a real thing, that's not what's going on. It's not to say that healthcare systems aren't trying to profit and reduce and maximize the benefit of the commercial benefit of the medicines. That's going to happen one way or the other, but at least people can be educated. Sorry, I'm going on about this. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, Rachel said something here. So Rachel, did you want to just share what you said about the 1972 book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney? Did you want to talk?
I have my headphones on. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes.
Jeremy, it's good to see you. Lakshmi, thanks for doing this. Well, as always, I was trained as a historian, so I think that the longue durée, very, very deep histories of underdevelopment, and the tendency that I hear in you, Lakshmi, to sort of talk, very generally about Africa, when I forget the size of it. I didn't have a chance to Google it and something else, but like, I think it contains the whole continental North America and Europe plus. Like, it's a very, very, very big place. And so to the extent, if you look at the map now of where the surviving equatorial green belt is, which is, the medicines that I think we're talking about, and the places that preservation, there's the green belt group out in Kenya. That's a different region than South Africa or, Eastern Africa, which has more contact, I think, with the Indian continent, South Asia and stuff. So I think because I've read so much, across the late 90s, and our university had a lot of MacArthur students, a really robust African history program. I think I took classes from 5 different faculty members in South Africa, Ghana, Tanzania, someone else in South Africa. So I feel like there's just like what I see in the evangelicalism that you're talking about, Jeremy, is also the newness of their encounter, right? Perry and Brian Hubbard have just encountered this in the last 2 or 3 years. And so that sort of, like if you're in an AA room and someone's really sober, they're going to freaking love the program. And the pink cloud hasn't worn off yet. And the market, the enthusiasm, for the market, American evangelical Christianity is like its own sort of weird thing. But Lakshmi, I think that's where the substance of my kind of constant, like, it's a little more subtle. It's a lot more subtle. I hesitate when I hear claims that are just way abstracted from historical reality. We're not there yet. Maybe it's another couple centuries until that kind of egalitarianism exists. That
maybe we'll get there if we start now. Yeah, no, I don't mean to minimize a whole continent. If I did, I apologize that, if I said that in some statement or framework that minimizes. Culture is no doubt very, very complex and intertwined and varied and diverse, and there's so much going on. You can't really.
Maybe another example that I could give, and this is very, very. I'm not part of the Native American church. I was married into a family where the kids were raised in ceremony. And I have a couple nephews and stuff. And, well, you're alcoholic. Why don't you go to the meeting? And their reverence for the people who do those kinds of ceremonies is so humble. They're like, oh, no, that can really mess with you. And that's what I think is missing, that kind of reverence, humility, and understanding about, so we have this ethnogeographic split. At whatever point that Gaia went in all these different ways and drifted, and the people are separated from each other, this Brave New World stuff, it's only been 100 years, right, that people have been able to cross the Atlantic in airplanes. So I'm just not sure the same thing is scaling up the treatments. It's a little bit too easy to generalize, and then to generalize that we can collapse all that history and just move forward with God consciousness and liberated people who have, Jeremy, I love the way you said that, like, not done the shadow work, and the cultural hangovers, and how those larger negativities can influence so what goes on. So, but I'm like that. Although I'll say never, never, never. I spent years grading paper. Don't say never. Don't overgeneralize. And I think that's what I would caution about your
Just overgeneralizing. Okay, point taken. Yeah, but I think I totally agree with you about reverence. That reverence is the foundation of true culture. We need that return to reverence, and I think that's what your forest dwelling. You're talking about a kind of reverence in the embodied reverence in that attitude, and maybe that's really what we're missing is that a collective reverence. And, that's because we as a culture have not had access to the sacrament for a really long time. And that Gabonese culture in Congo, they've had access to the sacrament for a long time. So um, we're missing that. We're missing that. And that's what we need. And so to just bring it back around to the topic, when people start reducing the molecule and reducing the effects so that it can be a more manageable medicine, that's one reason. And so that it can be dispensed in just in pill form without needing oversight is another reason. And then just reducing it because they don't want to deal with the awakened consciousness of people who start to see things as they really are. That's always been a danger for governments and states, is knowledge is power. That's, the maxim. And I think that does influence these laws, like in Oregon and other places. They're afraid of what they might unleash with these medicines, and perhaps rightly so. But that's what's going on. And at the same time, we have all these traumas accumulated as a culture, as a species, no matter where you are. I mean, whether you're Western or Eastern, there's pedophilia and there's war going on, and there's so many things going on that we need ways to transcend and wake up at a higher level of consciousness collectively so that we can make a difference and change the course of history. I don't think that's overspeaking or generalizing. It's how I see it as the problem and the thing that we need to do.
Yep, I think it's ultimately, if I come back full circle to what I started to talk about, I think it's recognizing that there are bodies of knowledge and institutions where ultimately, from a therapeutic healing modality perspective, a container has been built that has, in the best case, there is a body of knowledge which keeps people safe and keeps people grounded. And where I go against, I think maybe your perspective is wanting to respect those bodies of knowledge that have been built up across time, and they are specific to places, and raiding from them, you do it your peril. I'm Buddhist, and I love listening to wise Buddhist people talking. And I was listening to this one Tibetan Buddhist chap when I was driving earlier, and he was talking about how the mindfulness industry has been hijacked. And he talked about an advert saying, look, you can achieve enlightenment in 7 days if you just do my course or whatever. And that's the kind of cultural appropriation which is offensive, which is, look, if you follow a Buddhist path, don't expect anything like immediate results. It takes many years of meditation and practice and ethically grounded living and being sensitive to what you say, what comes out of your mouth. It's a very long journey, and there can be sideways steps and backward steps. But when you're in a community, a sangha of people who are further ahead in the journey than you, they're kind of holding you on your own journey. So there's a kind of system of elders and wiser people. And that's the container, that Buddhism at its best provides for one spiritual tradition. And so my fear is, if you come and you think you can raid from that or hack that or appropriate that, you're probably putting yourself in a bit of vulnerability and trouble at the least, and shoring up maybe karmic consequences for yourself. So, it's just to respect, oftentimes religions are not as good as that, but fortunately, my experience of Buddhist traditions and where I've had sanghas, it's been full of people that I just have enormous respect for, who are further ahead on their journey, and they can kind of help me on mine. And so it's that community of institutional knowledge, which actually at its best is the best humans can do really for each other, you know. And I don't think those things can be kind of raided and hacked, and then kind of repackaged.
Well, I want to correct something you said, because I don't think I'm against you on that and what you're saying. I have no desire, or I am not in any way saying that you should raid or hack.
Yeah,
All I'm saying is that we should be aware that uh, there are better ways to do it than what is being presented to us in the commercial pantheon of people, you know, at different levels of experience. And so people who come to this medicine who are new to it need to see through some of that and know who knows something versus who doesn't know something and is promising, making you cheap promises. And those kind of snake oil salesmen have been around forever.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And will be around forever, probably.
I think it's about not seeing institutions, including religious institutions, as inherently bad or inherently good, but respecting that when they're working well, they are a conduit for one's own spiritual evolution. And there's much to be admired for people that have spent many years devoting their lives, and many generations who've devoted their lives to building up these institutions. Now, many religious institutions are not that, and they have become corrupted and bastardized, and including Buddhist traditions and in different places. But what we should aspire to is something like the Buddhist model of a Sangha, where there's a community of elders who are encouraging and supportive. And you know, if you go there for your own healing, then there's, you know, to make sure that they don't become corrupted, then you have to have a lot of horizontal accountability and vertical accountability and keep each other in check. And if there's some ego inflation going on with the leader and they see themselves as a guru all of a sudden, then, you know, that needs to be nipped in the bud. And you know, unfortunately, psychedelics, because they're being transplanted into the West, where there's a lot of anomie, and we've lost any strong sense in many places of respect for religious institutions. They're sort of being transplanted onto barren ground, and so structures of accountability that might be latent in the culture are just not there at all, and so people can get away with anything. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happened with psychedelics in the last few years. Is you have people that think that they are the you know, savior dispatched from God to bring these medicines to the world. And yeah, here we are. We're right in the throes of that. I think these people will come and go, though. I mean, I think they some of them have had their time already, and have, you know, it's one thing to be a really good advocate for Ibogaine and articulate and passionate, and, you know, go to all the right corridors of power in Washington, and raise awareness. But once that awareness has reached a certain critical mass, we don't need you anymore. Fuck off.
Well said.
That's how I feel at the moment. You know, there's a moment for advocacy, especially political advocacy. But once it gets traction, then you ain't needed anymore. It's professionals who give their life to being of service to the medicine. They're the most important people. It's like in hospitals, it's not the hospital managers, it's the nurses and the doctors, but especially the nurses, who are the people that are doing God's work, you know, not the policymakers or the administrators or anything like that.
Well, what's happening though is the greed factor, or the profit motive, right? The policymakers want to then become the ones profiting from all that work they've done up front. And that's what's going on at that level. But I love the way you say it. Yeah, I totally agree with you that's what needs to happen, is respect and reverence for the knowledge keepers, no matter which culture they come from, because they come from many different. Here's Gareth, for example. He's not a Bwiti person, but he's been working with this medicine for 20 years, knows a lot.
I mean, I'm working in Malawi at the moment, mining stuff. And they have the best cannabis in the world. Malawi Gold is like, well, I don't want to say the best, but they have a very, very good strain of cannabis, which is, native to Malawi. I don't know why it's good and how, but whatever. And you can buy, and they've even got a cannabis regulatory authority and whatnot. But what you don't see in Malawi is, cannabis tech companies scaling and producing gummies that are sold in California or anything like that. They're struggling. They don't have access to money. The banking networks, the financial investment network sucks. There's no money flowing in. So it's an inevitable expropriation that on the one hand you have really good native, if I can use that word, cannabis strains in that desperately poor part of the world, but all the money and value is made elsewhere. Malawi gold is no doubt being grown in different parts of the world, and just face that, like when you, I guess in my lifetime, I've seen too much poverty. And, when you have a kid, it's even more heartbreaking when you see, young kids that have nothing and are malnourished. It just totally breaks your heart every single time. And so Malawi is just one of these places where a lot of people can't afford to have shoes and it's desperately poor and the roads are awful. And, but they have God's gift of a strain of cannabis, but they're not able to leverage what they have for the benefit of their own people. Now, you could just say, well, tough titty, that's how the world is. I'm just the kind of person that responds to that by thinking, well, that's just basically unfair that they have a bounty in their midst that they are not able to use for economic empowerment. Now, I want to know your perspective on this, Lakshmi, because for me, just my politics and my ethos is it's just wrong and it's not fair and what can be done, what can be done. I don't have any solutions because basically many parts of Africa, it's just hard to raise money to set up a business. And if you do, then the interest rates you pay on the loan are like 15%, 20% compared to, elsewhere where you can get much cheaper bank loans to set up business. So it's just structurally unfair for me that places which have nature's gift can't bootstrap themselves into economic empowerment just because of how things are with businesses and raising money. And I guess because I've had a lot of life experience of seeing those really unfair parts of the world that Trump calls shitholes, but they are like that for a produced, manufactured reason. It's not like these people are stupid or helpless. It's just there's a whole system which goes against them ever being able to lift themselves up. And so it's not the point we're making about cultural essentialism. No. It's just there are some parts of the world where it's much harder to be a human trying to get ahead in life than other parts of the world, even if they have God's gift in nature in their midst.
Right.
What do you think? How do you respond to that?
Well, I think that this problem is about a lack of consciousness in people who are it's not an easy solution, because what goes on in the world of business is if you're creating a company, you have to create a profit, you have to get an investor, the investor wants the highest profit possible, and there are all these factors which then tie your hands, where you cannot actually, you might be a very generous minded person who wants to who would love to give all the profits back to the Malawi or work out some kind of agreement, but the costs of doing business are so high that the profit becomes less on this side, and so you have this culture of profit versus profit that is really creating these unfair situations. It's about competition and about and when I first got into, I'm not a great business person, I'm learning, but when I first got into looking at, when I saw that people were looking for the percentage of the profit margin that people shoot for in their companies is so huge, 60% to 200%, and you think, wow, do you really need that much? And that's how you get the Elon Musks of the world and the people who are billionaires, who are making so much money on the backs of people who have very little, just like Nike doing shoes and paying so little China. Uh, So it's a universal mindset that we're going to have to transcend. And the thing that can help us transcend it is psychedelics, because psychedelics can touch your heart, open your compassion, make you feel connected to other human beings, and perhaps you'll be more decent as a person in whatever role you're in, whether you're in the role of a businessman or a activist or a medicine, whatever it is, you'll be more ethical. That's the hope of psychedelics. So that's my answer. I don't really know if it's an answer, but what it means, what I mean, this is why I toil, because it's a lot of work to do all this, but I toil so that people can have a bigger understanding of who they are.
But going back to Gabon, right, where we started, like if you're a Gabonese person, you got like one hand, if not two hands, tied behind your back in terms of how hard it is to get ahead. Unless you're born into a privileged family in Libreville. And so if you're just like a normal human being who's like sensitive to the plight of others and aware of your own privilege, you're probably going to go to Gabon and think, oh my God, unless you're completely self-obsessed, apart from maybe having a really good Bwiti experience, if you go for initiation, you might also think, what can be done?
Sure.
Like what can I do? And that's so many folks that, like authentic people that go to Gabon and come back wanting to stimulate, talk about reciprocity. That's, I think, where they're coming from, is that they've had that experience of what it's, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, of how difficult and how much is stacked against you, and how overprivileged you didn't even realize you were, right? And that's, I think, which is the heart of this. Like, I wonder how much you tune into that. I'm not getting at you personally, but I'm, like it's like let's recognize how difficult it is in many parts of the world to get ahead, and let's do what we can to honor where they're coming from and help them without being paternalistic and patronizing, And
Absolutely.
I think that's the core of it. That's what motivates me to. It's not about romanticizing or fetishizing or exoticizing the other. It's just much more of a human response to how shitty and difficult it is to grow up and live and try and get ahead in some parts of the world. And having a basic human response to that, which is like, well, what can I do? What can I
Yeah.
do? And then one form of that is, well, shit, they've got Iboga, or shit, they've got Malawi gold. How can I help their businesses and help them get ahead? And this is where, and maybe, we're nearly 2 hours in, whatever, but reciprocity for me is like helping people empower themselves in places like Gabon so that there can be. It may not be realistic to have a GMP Ibogaine factory in Gabon. There's discussions and debates around that, but Gabon should be leading the research on botanical research on Tabernanthe iboga and Tabernanthe elliptica, the two main forms of the Tabernanthe family. Shouldn't be Western botanical institutions, or at least Western botanical institutions should absolutely partner up and build knowledge and capacity of botanical plants in Gabon.
But this is where it's a should. You're saying they should do this. It's not going to happen until the consciousness that is elevated, as yours has been elevated, where you see these things in this way. It's not going to happen until that happens on a more collective level. So I think it's really noble and good. And if I go to Gabon, it will probably evoke all kinds of things in me that I have not yet experienced. So
I think, Lakshmi, you need to, stop talking about Iboga and Ibogaine and Gabon and get yourself over there.
it'll happen. It'll happen when it happens. Yeah. I will at some point.
Yeah.
Well,
hopefully you've got a sense of where I'm coming from and what motivates me, and what do I know? Not very much, but what am I passionate about? A lot. And justice and unfairness really motivate me, and you can't go to Gabon and not be moved by injustice and unfairness if you've got a human bone in your body. Same with Malawi, and same with many other parts of the world. And
up in
one
India. So
exactly.
so much of that. I mean, you see people with horrific things, horrific ways of life, and
Exactly.
yeah, I think we're fortunate. We're fortunate in many ways to have the lives that we have.
Rachel has her yellow hand up.
Oh, she does? Oh, hi, Rachel. Yes, go ahead.
I do. I've had the privilege of seeing Brian Hubbard talk a few times, and also some of my conservative friends. It's not just about making money; it's about saving money and making the detoxification interventions and rehabilitations more effective. I just wanted to add that, the number crunching he did, and Lakshmi, I keep meaning to WhatsApp you. Thank you for that estimate you put on my Facebook about the cost. But it's like conservatives will get behind something not just to make money from a profit, but to save money. And so, like Del Potter's essay, like, is there a third way? I keep thinking of, like, Dana wants to say, oh, we can do this in military purposes or this and that. And it's like, there's been so much cutback with the USAID programs, and there's such a need, as we all know, that Jeremy just sort of put very, very elegantly, that the underdevelopment of Africa could also be a reinvestment. I'm not sure if this is going to sound too American hawkish and stuff, but China is doing what it's doing on that continent, and Russia's doing what it's doing, and our current administration has, pulled a lot of funding back. I also think about that, reinvesting in human resources from a public health perspective for precisely the reasons you outlined, an hour ago, Jeremy. It's just like, who's going to get what quality of care and treatment. So maybe, Lakshmi, the holistic version that you're seeing, the sort of more idealistic possibilities, could have an economic component to it, but like turning it inside out. Like, how do you do business psychedelically?
Yeah, exactly. No, well said.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you.
glad of this conversation because it has been able to contextualize discussions around Ibogaine and Iboga in more of a kind of, hopefully, and more thanks to Rachel and the conversation we've had in general, but more systematically in the kind of structural factors that go against social economic development in different parts of Africa. Because that's the fundamental thing that irks me and makes me passionate, that there's nature's bounty in certain parts of the world, but there's no economic gain in those parts of the world, and it's just yet another expropriation, extractivism game. And here we are, aren't we better than that as a species? It appears not.
Yeah, thank you. That well said. And I think that's a good place for us to end our conversation. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Really, it's not like you know nothing, you know quite a lot. Appreciated your feedback and the historical context and everything. And
I think I annoyed Nisha and she signed off. I'm really not an arsehole. It's just I disagree with her idea that the Bantu people was somehow the formative cultural metaphysical template for the people of Gabon, because they were not, and they invaded Gabon only 100 to 200 years ago, and that's just the reality. Do your research.
Right, I think she's gone, but yeah, noted. So just to wrap up, the recording of this is going to be on awake.net/Ibogaine, where all the other Thursday conversations are, and I hope to see more of you on Awake. Jeremy, maybe you can do some blogging or something and speak more about the things you're passionate about, because like you said, it takes a village, and it's a start to have an online village, like that's a start towards that goal of having community and a community of mentors and masters, which is what we're creating there. So anyone on this call, please join us, awake.net. Thank you very much.
Bye.